Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. The cruelest thing my girlfriend, Celine Hart, ever did was stand in our Baltimore apartment doorway with my duffel bag at her feet, look me up and down like I was a stain she was finally scrubbing out, and say, "Where would you even go?" Not "Are you okay?" Not "Please don't leave." Just a question designed to remind me she had built my life into a corner. She said it with a small smile, like she was proud of the trap. Then she nudged a plain envelope across the counter with one finger, like I was being served. Here's how it happened. My name is Malcolm Reed. I'm 35, black, born and raised between Prince George's County and Baltimore, and I work in operations for a medical supply distributor that runs routes up and down the I-95 corridor. I used to think love was the steady choice you made every day. Not the grand gesture, not the apology after a blow-up, just the quiet building of a home with someone who wanted to build with you too. When I met Celine, she felt like ambition with a pulse, polished, quick, always a plan, always moving. I mistook her momentum for commitment. We met at a friend's birthday dinner in Harbor East. Celine wore a cream blazer and talked about her job in HR, like it was a chessboard she understood better than anyone else. She asked questions the way people do when they want to learn your weak spots and your strengths at the same time. I liked that she listened. She laughed easily, and when she followed me outside afterward to say she had a good time talking to me, I felt that rare relief of being chosen on purpose. We started dating, and it moved quickly, but it didn't feel reckless at first. The early months were simple. She'd come to my place after work with takeout from Little Italy or grocery bags and a list of meals she wanted to try. She talked about us like it was already decided. She'd ask about my childhood, my mother, what kind of husband I imagined being someday. That kind of attention is intoxicating when you are a steady man who has spent years being the dependable one. I started letting my routines bend around her. I started leaving space for her everywhere. Celine's apartment lease was ending, and my building had a unit opening up in the same complex. She framed moving in like a practical step. Lower combined costs, shorter commute, more time together. She said she wanted to do life with me, and I believed her because she sounded so sure. I also believed her because in those months she never raised her voice at me. Her control didn't come out as yelling. It came as decisions made while I was still trying to be reasonable. The first time I felt a shift was small. We sat at my kitchen table, and she asked to see my budget. Not in a nosy way. She said she called it planning for our future. I showed her because I didn't think I had anything to hide. I thought transparency was respect. She praised how organized I was, then suggested we simplify by using one joint account for bills so nothing slips. I hesitated, and she touched my hand and said, "Malcolm, you're not married to your money. You're building a home with me." That line made me feel guilty for pausing. I agreed to a joint bill account, keeping my separate account for my paycheck. 2 months later, she suggested my direct deposit go into the joint account because the rent and utilities came out of it and it would reduce transfers. I said I'd think about it. She got quiet, then smiled like she was being patient with a child. "You're so afraid of being vulnerable," she said. "Do you want to be my partner or not?" I remember agreeing just to end the tension. I didn't see that the tension was the tool. When we moved into the new unit, Celine offered to handle the lease paperwork because she said she had experience. I sat beside her as she filled things out, and at one point she paused, then said the property manager had suggested keeping only one name on the lease to make renewals easier. I didn't like it, but Celine made it sound temporary, like a clerical choice. "You're here, Malcolm," she said. "A paper doesn't change that." I let it go because I didn't want to argue over something that felt small. That was the first brick in the wall. 6 months in, Celine started talking to me like I was always one mistake away from messing everything up. If I forgot a grocery item, she'd sigh and say, "This is why I plan." If I came home tired and quiet, she'd say, "You're so moody lately." If I asked for alone time, she'd call it avoidant. Her criticism wasn't loud, but it was constant, like a slow leak that empties you without you noticing. I started trying harder. I started apologizing for things I couldn't name. The next shift was social. Celine got close to my friends fast, texting them memes, checking in, inviting them over. At first, it felt supportive. Then I noticed little changes. My friend Andre would stop mid-sentence when I walked into the room. My cousin Nia in D.C. began sending shorter messages, like she didn't have time. My mother in Richmond started asking if I was doing okay, the way people ask when they've already heard something they aren't repeating. Celine would look at me and say, "See, people worry when you shut down." One night, I asked her directly what she had said to my mom. Celine didn't flinch. "I told her you've been stressed," she said calmly. "I told her you've been struggling with your confidence." She said it like she was being helpful. My chest tightened. I told her it wasn't her place to frame me like that. She smiled, slow and flat. "If you don't want people to know you're struggling," she said, "then stop struggling." Then she turned back to her laptop like the conversation was finished. The first time I realized she could be cruel on purpose was the night my car wouldn't start. I was exhausted after a late shift, and I called Celine from the parking lot. She arrived 20 minutes later, leaned against her car, and watched me try again. When I asked if she could help me call roadside assistance, she said, "You're a grown man." Her voice wasn't angry. It was contemptuous, like my need irritated her. I ended up figuring it out alone and driving home in silence. She hummed to herself in the passenger seat, scrolling, unbothered. Money got tighter in ways I couldn't explain. I checked the joint account and see purchases I didn't recognize, small at first, then bigger. When I asked, she'd say, "It was for the house," or "It's an investment," or "We didn't mind last time." If I pressed, she'd accuse me of micromanaging. She started calling me cheap in a teasing tone that never felt like a joke. One evening, she said, "It's so unattractive when you get like this." And I felt myself go quiet because I didn't want to be unattractive to the person I loved. Then my credit card company called about a missed payment I didn't know existed. I checked my email and saw alerts I hadn't opened. Celine said she must have accidentally filtered them when she was organizing my inbox. That was when I realized she had access to my accounts. I asked why. She shrugged. "You asked me to help," she said. I never asked her to take over my life. But she said it like I had signed away the right to be surprised. She said it like I was ungrateful for the cage. Around that time, Celine started bringing up my job more often, asking what my supervisor thought of me, whether I felt secure, whether I worried about layoffs. She'd say it like she was concerned, but it landed like a suggestion that my stability depended on her. When I got promoted to lead coordinator, she congratulated me with a quick hug, then said, "Just don't let it get to your head." The night I got my new title, she picked a fight about dishes, and somehow I ended up apologizing for celebrating too loudly. I tried to correct the course. I suggested counseling. Celine laughed. "You want a stranger to tell you how to be a man?" she asked. I suggested we spend more time with my family, so things felt balanced. She said my family enabled my victim mindset. I suggested we keep separate accounts again and contribute to bills evenly. Her eyes narrowed, and she said, "So you want to live like roommates?" Then she added, almost softly, "Men who plan exits usually take them." That line landed like a threat wrapped in a whisper. The first time she forced me out of the apartment wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. She told me she needed space to think and said I should sleep somewhere else for a few nights. I stared at her, stunned. I asked where she expected me to go. She looked amused. "You have friends," she said. I called Andre. He didn't answer. I called my cousin Nia. She texted that she was busy. I ended up in my car in a Columbia parking lot, trying to rest without really sleeping. In the morning, I went to work with my eyes burning. Celine didn't text once. When I came back 2 days later, the locks weren't changed, but the energy was. Celine moved around the apartment like she was doing me a favor by letting me exist in her space. She set rules. No questions, no heavy conversations, no negative energy. If I tried to talk, she'd say I was exhausted. She stopped touching me. Not angrily, just absent, like affection was a resource she could cut off to teach me a lesson. And when I asked what we were doing, she said, "I'm deciding if you're worth the stress." I started living in a constant state of waiting, waiting for her mood, waiting for permission, waiting for the next moment she would remind me I was replaceable. At work, I tried to act normal, but my focus slipped. My supervisor asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was just tired. I didn't want anyone to know my home felt like a courtroom where I was always on trial and never allowed to speak. The shame was heavy because I had built an identity on being competent, and now I could not even manage my own relationship. The betrayal that changed everything came from a place I didn't expect, my own circle. One Saturday, I walked into a cookout at Andre's place in Catonsville and felt the room quiet in a way that made my skin crawl. Andre hugged me, but didn't look me in the eye. His girlfriend avoided me entirely. Someone joked about relationship drama and laughed too hard. Later, Andre pulled me aside and said, "Celine's been worried about you." The way he said it made me feel like he was talking about a problem, not a friend. I asked what she told him. He hesitated. That hesitation cracked something open. When I pressed Andre, he finally admitted Celine had told him I was unpredictable, that I had anger issues, that I might do something if she tried to leave. I felt sick. I asked Andre if he believed that. He didn't answer directly. He said, "I just want everybody safe." That sentence hit like a slap. I walked out of the cookout and sat in my car, hands shaking, trying to understand how Celine had turned my own people into witnesses against me. She hadn't just isolated me. She had contaminated me in their eyes. That night, I confronted her. Celine didn't deny it. She didn't even look guilty. She leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, and said, "I told them the truth. If it makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should change." I asked her why she would paint me as dangerous. She shrugged. "It keeps things calm," she said, as if reputation was a leash. Then she added, almost bored, "You're not leaving anyway." That was the moment something in me went cold. Not rage, not revenge, just clarity. I realized she had been working from the assumption I was trapped. I started paying attention like a man who had finally accepted he was in trouble. I checked bank statements carefully. I found charges tied to subscriptions I never agreed to and cash withdrawals I could not explain. I checked my credit report and saw a store card open in my name. When I asked Celine about it, she said it was for home stuff, then rolled her eyes and said, "Do you want receipts for everything?" I said yes. She laughed. "You are not built for adulthood," she said. She didn't know that sentence pushed me into action. The next morning, I went to my lunch break and sat in my car with my phone and my hands steady for the first time in months. I called my bank and asked how to separate accounts. I called my credit card company and asked about unauthorized activity. I froze my credit. Each call was humiliating because I felt like I was admitting failure. But each call also felt like pulling air into a room that had been sealed shut. By the end of that week, I opened a new bank account only in my name, rerouted my direct deposit, and changed every password I could remember. I didn't tell Celine. I moved quietly because I understood now that any warning would trigger her to tighten the trap. I began moving my important documents, passport, birth certificate, social security card, into a locked drawer in my office. I took photos of statements. I printed records. I started a plain notebook and wrote down dates, times, and things she said. Not because I wanted drama, but because I wanted reality. When someone has been rewriting your life, you need evidence just to trust your own memory. I also looked for a place to live. Not a brand new apartment, not a flex, just a clean, small one-bedroom in Columbia, Maryland, close enough to commute, but far enough to breathe. I toured it on a weekday morning, signed the lease with my own money, and felt my throat tighten when I held the keys. I sat in the empty unit for 15 minutes, listening to the silence. It didn't feel lonely. It felt honest. The only person who knew was the leasing agent and my attorney, because by then I had decided to speak to someone who understood the legal edges of what was happening. The attorney, Renee Whitaker, was a black woman in her 40s with a calm voice and eyes that didn't soften when I tried to minimize what had happened. I told her I wasn't married. I told her it was just my girlfriend. I told her it probably wasn't that serious. She listened, then said, "It's serious if your identity and finances are being used against you." She told me what I could document and what steps were legitimate. She didn't promise revenge. She promised structure. And that was the first time in a long time I felt like a grown man again. Celine noticed my distance and tried a new approach, sweetness. She cooked dinner. She called me baby with a softness I hadn't heard in months. She asked if I was okay and touched my arm as if we were normal. For one evening, I almost wanted to believe it. Then she asked casually if I could increase my contribution to the bills because she had a lot going on. The timing was too perfect. The affection felt like a transaction. I told her I'd look at the numbers later. Her smile stayed, but her eyes hardened. "Don't start acting weird," she said. "I don't have patience for that." 2 days later, she forced me out again, more aggressively. She said she wanted me gone for the weekend because she needed to reset. When I asked if she was having someone over, she gave me a look that said my question was beneath her. "Even if I was," she said, "what would you do about it?" My face got hot. I said I live there too. She pointed at the lease folder in the drawer and said, "Do you?" And she opened the front door and waited. I walked out because I could feel how close the situation was to becoming something she could weaponize even more. I drove to my new place in Columbia and sat on the floor, shaking. That weekend, I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a kid. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears in an empty apartment, feeling the weight of how far I had let things go. I thought about how I had tried to be loving and got called weak. I thought about how I tried to be patient and got treated like I deserved disrespect. I thought about how Celine had looked at me and decided my loyalty meant I could be used. And in that quiet, I made a decision. I was done negotiating my worth with someone who enjoyed watching me beg for it. When I returned to Baltimore Monday morning, Celine was sitting at the kitchen counter with my duffel bag by the door, like she had staged the scene. Her hair was perfect. Her expression was neutral. She said, "We should take a break." Then she added, "But you need to move out." I asked what changed. She shrugged. "I'm tired," she said. "You drain me." That line was designed to make me feel like a burden. I asked how much time she was giving me. She looked at the duffel bag and said, "You're already packed." I stood there, feeling my hands go cold. She had packed my things herself, which felt like an invasion. I asked where my work laptop was. She pointed to the bag. I asked where my documents were. She shrugged. "You lose things," she said. I asked for my keys. She held them up and said, "I'll mail anything you forgot." Then she said it again. The question was like a nail. "Where would you even go?" This time she said it with satisfaction. It wasn't a curiosity. It was dominance. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I took a breath and walked to the counter. I placed the plain envelope down in front of her. No dramatic throw, no shaking hands. Just paper meeting wood. Celine looked at it like it was a joke. "What's that?" she asked. I said, "Open it." She smirked, tore it open, and began reading. I watched her eyes move across the pages. I watched the smirk flatten. Not into guilt. Celine didn't do guilt, but into calculation. She flipped to the next page faster, then the next like she could outrun what she was seeing. Inside was a notarized notice that I had separated my financial obligations from any shared accounts tied to my identity. A demand letter documenting unauthorized activity and confirmation that a formal fraud report had been filed and received. It was not revenge. It was a boundary with teeth. Celine's jaw tightened. She looked up at me and said, "You're bluffing." I didn't respond. She read again, slower. Then she threw the papers on the counter and said, "You're trying to ruin me." Her voice rose, but her eyes stayed dry. No remorse, only anger that I had moved without her permission. "You don't have a backbone," she said, leaning forward. "You won't follow through." I looked at her and realized she truly believed that. She believed I was the kind of man who would swallow anything just to keep the peace. She believed my decency was a weakness she could rely on. I picked up my duffel bag. I asked for my keys. She held them out, but didn't let go immediately. "You're nothing without me," she said. "You'll be back." When she finally released the keys, it felt like a chain snapping. I walked out without shouting. I didn't give her the satisfaction. In my car, I sat for a minute with my forehead against the steering wheel. The humiliation still lived in my body, but it was no longer steering me. I drove to Columbia. I carried my bag into my quiet apartment and locked the door behind me. That lock was the first time I felt safe in months. I texted my mother one sentence. "I moved out. I'm okay. I'll explain soon." She responded immediately, worried, and I could feel how much damage Celine's story had already done. I told myself I would repair it, but I wouldn't do it by begging. I would do it by living the truth. The next week was hard in a different way. Instead of chaos, there was paperwork and silence. The bank contacted me with questions. The credit bureaus confirmed the freeze. Renee Whitaker asked me to send screenshots and statements and timelines. I did it all after work at my kitchen table, alone, drinking water like it was medicine. The process was slow. It was not cinematic, but it was real, and that made it powerful. Meanwhile, Celine sent messages that swung between insults and threats. You're pathetic. You'll regret this. You think anybody wants you? Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she take responsibility. At work, I started breathing again. My focus returned. My supervisor noticed and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled politely and didn't explain. My job was part of my recovery because it reminded me I could still keep things moving. I began waking up early, cooking simple breakfasts, walking around my neighborhood in Columbia before my shift. Small routines rebuilt my dignity brick by brick. I did not post about it. I did not announce anything. I just began living like a man who expected his own life to be stable again. That quiet expectation was new. 2 weeks after I left, Andre called. His voice sounded uneasy. He said Celine told him I had gone crazy and was trying to destroy her career. He said he didn't know what to believe. That sentence hurt more than I expected. I asked him a question. Do you remember me before Celine? There was a pause. I told him I had documentation and legal counsel. I didn't beg him to pick my side. I told him he could believe whatever made him feel comfortable, but I wasn't going to carry anyone's confusion on my back anymore. After I hung up, my hands shook. Then the shaking stopped. Celine's karma arrived the way it often does in real life. Not as a dramatic downfall, but as the consequences of her own choices finally catching up. The joint account was flagged during the investigation, and the bank began asking her questions she could not charm away. Purchases were traced. Access tightened. The store card in my name triggered an inquiry. Celine texted me furious demands. Fix it. Call them. Tell them you made a mistake. It was almost laughable how she expected me to clean up what she had done. When I didn't respond, she sent a voice note calling me a coward. Her lack of remorse was consistent, even when the floor under her shifted. A week later, she showed up outside my job in Elkridge. I saw her through the glass doors, standing too straight, as if posture could restore control. My stomach dropped, but I didn't panic. I walked out with a coworker nearby, kept my voice low, and asked what she wanted. Celine said she just wanted to talk. I told her to email my attorney. Her eyes flashed. You're hiding behind lawyers, she snapped. I said, I'm protecting myself. She laughed sharp. From what? From me. Then she leaned closer and said, You're going to regret humiliating me. There was no apology, just a threat. I turned around and walked back in. That night, I sat on my couch in Columbia and felt the old fear try to return. Then I opened my laptop and reread my own notes, the dates, the statements, the messages. Reality steadied me. I called Renee and told her Celine had shown up. Renee documented it. She reminded me to keep everything factual and calm. After the call, I stared at my ceiling and realized something. Celine's power had always depended on my silence. The minute I started treating my life like it mattered, her control started collapsing. Not because I became someone new overnight, but because I stopped cooperating with the version of me she needed. The next consequence hit quietly but hard. Celine worked in HR. Her career depended on trust and clean records. When the bank investigation and related inquiries started surfacing, she became cautious, then frantic. She began calling mutual contacts, trying to gather information, trying to pressure me indirectly. People who had been distant from me started reaching out with awkward questions. I didn't defend myself with long speeches. I told them one line, there's documentation, and it's being handled legally. Some people disappeared after that. Some apologized quietly. I accepted the apologies without warmth because I had learned that loyalty you have to chase is not loyalty. One evening, my mother drove up from Richmond to see me. She walked into my apartment, looked around at the simple furniture, the clean counters, the calm, and her eyes filled with tears. She said, I thought you were falling apart. I told her the truth. I had been. I told her how Celine had spoken about me, how she had turned people. My mother's face hardened with a kind of grief that looks like anger. She said, Why didn't you tell me? I said, Because I was embarrassed. She hugged me and whispered, "You don't have to be embarrassed to come home to your mother." That sentence healed something I didn't know was still bleeding. The investigation didn't end overnight. That's the part people don't like in stories, the waiting. There were forms, calls, confirmations, and long stretches of nothing. But during that waiting, I built my life. I paid my bills on time. I saved money. I rebuilt my credit slowly, the responsible way. I started training for a better role at work, taking a certification course on weekends. I didn't do it to prove anything to Celine. I did it because I wanted my life to be mine again, not a reaction to someone else's cruelty. Success, I learned, can be quiet and still feel like justice. Celine kept trying to regain leverage. She texted late at night. "You miss me." She texted early in the morning. "You're nothing." She sent long paragraphs accusing me of betrayal. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry I hurt you." When I blocked her number, she emailed me. When I filtered her email, she contacted my cousin. When my cousin didn't respond, Celine posted vague quotes online about men who destroy women when they can't control them. I didn't respond. I didn't explain myself publicly. I let the paperwork speak. Letting silence be strength felt unfamiliar, but it worked. The most satisfying part of karma isn't watching someone suffer. It's watching the truth stand up without your help. One afternoon, Renee called me and said the bank's findings supported my report. She explained what that meant in practical terms. Accounts would be closed, liabilities clarified, and the fraudulent activity would not be pinned on me. I sat at my kitchen table in Colombia and felt my shoulders drop for the first time in a year. It wasn't joy like fireworks. It was a relief like clean air. I thanked her, then sat there quietly, letting my nervous system understand it was safe to unclench. A few days later, Andre texted me. He said he was sorry. He said he should have trusted what he knew about me. He said Celine had tried to get him to back her up on a story that didn't make sense anymore. I read the message twice. I didn't feel victory. I felt tired. I told him, "I accept your apology, but things won't be the same." He asked if we could talk. I said maybe later. That boundary was part of my comeback too. I didn't need to punish people. I needed to stop letting people access me without care. Celine's own consequences came in the form of her choices closing doors she assumed would stay open. She began missing work. She became sharper with coworkers. She tried to intimidate people the way she had intimidated me. In HR, that kind of behavior does not stay hidden forever. A friend of a friend later told me Celine had been placed under review. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't take a victory lap. I just sat with the quiet truth that power built on manipulation is unstable. Eventually, the structure collapses under its own lies, because lies require constant maintenance. The final message Celine ever sent me came from a new number. It was short, bitter, and still without remorse. "You ruined my life. You were supposed to have nowhere to go." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. I didn't respond because I finally understood something. Celine didn't miss me. She missed a version of me that made her feel safe in her cruelty. She missed having someone to blame and control. My comeback was not arguing with her definition of reality. My comeback was refusing to participate in it at all. A month later, I ran into Celine by accident in a grocery store in Laurel. I saw her in the aisle, reaching for something, and for a moment my body reacted like it used to. Tight chest, alert eyes. Then I noticed the difference. She looked smaller, not physically, but in presence. The confidence was still there, but it had an edge of strain, like a mask worn too long. She saw me, and her face hardened. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften. She looked me up and down and said, "So you're still pretending you're the victim?" I said calmly, "Take care, Celine," and walked away. My hands didn't shake. That was the real victory. Over time, people who truly knew me returned in quiet ways. My cousin Nia called and admitted Celine had told her I was unstable and that she should keep distance for safety. Nia said she felt guilty but didn't know what to do. I told her the truth without dramatics. I told her I understood fear can make people cautious, but I also understood that caution can become betrayal when it's unexamined. Nia apologized. I accepted it, but I also changed how much access she had in my life. Forgiveness didn't require me to forget the lesson. The hardest part of rebuilding wasn't money or housing. It was trusting my own perception again. When someone spends months telling you that you are too sensitive, too suspicious, too unstable, you start doubting your instincts. I began therapy in Colombia, weekly, quietly. I didn't announce it. I didn't make it a brand. I just sat in a small office and told the truth to someone trained to hold it. I learned to name control when I saw it. I learned that love doesn't require you to shrink. I learned that peace is not something you beg for. It's something you build and protect. 6 months after I left, I got a better job offer. Higher pay, stronger benefits, a leadership path. I accepted it and told only my mother and 2 close friends. I celebrated by cooking a simple dinner in my apartment and opening the windows to let in cool air. No speeches, no social media posts, no need to prove anything. That night, I looked around my small place, my clean counters, my calm, my locked door, and I felt a success that was almost private enough to be sacred. Celine would have called it small, but she had never understood that stability is a luxury when you've been living under threat. I kept the notebook for a while, then one day I realized I didn't need it anymore. The notes had done their job. They had anchored me when I felt myself floating in someone else's narrative. I stored the documents safely, not out of obsession, but out of responsibility. I stopped checking my phone as if something terrible might appear. I stopped bracing for the next insult. I started planning for things that had nothing to do with surviving someone else. Traveling to Chicago to visit a college friend, taking my mom to a nice restaurant in D.C., investing in a small side project that made me feel excited again. Life became bigger than the harm. Sometimes I still think about that moment in the Baltimore doorway. Celine looking at me like I was disposable and asking, "Where would you even go?" I think about how close I came to believing her. And I think about how the comeback wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was paperwork, boundaries, and the slow return of my own dignity. It was learning not to chase the people who turn away. It was learning that you can love someone and still leave them when they choose cruelty. The deepest revenge was not hurting her back. It was becoming unreachable to her chaos. The last thing I heard, months later, came through a quiet chain of acquaintances. Celine had moved out of the Baltimore apartment, downsized, and was telling anyone who would listen that I set her up. She was still angry, still unwilling to own anything. That part didn't surprise me. People who never feel remorse don't suddenly discover it, just because consequences arrive. They just look for a new target. And that, to me, was the final proof that leaving was right. I didn't need her to admit what she did for it to be real. I had lived it. Today, my life looks ordinary in the best way. I wake up in Colombia, make coffee, go to work, and come home to a space that feels like mine. My credit is clean again. My savings is steady. My relationships are smaller, but real. I don't argue about my worth anymore. And when I think of Celine's question, where would you even go? I finally have an answer that doesn't require explaining to anyone. I would go to myself. To the man I was before I got convinced that love meant tolerating disrespect. To the life I rebuilt quietly, carefully, and successfully without needing her permission. If this story hit you in the chest, don't just watch, join the channel family. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because these stories are for people rebuilding quietly after betrayal. And comment safe if you're choosing peace over chaos this year. I pinned something important in the comments. Go read it. The end.